Enterprise Management 360.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Tech Chat. Now in today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Richard Cassidy, who is the Senior Director, Security Strategy at Exabeam. So Richard, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Really great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity.
You're very welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We've got a lot to kind of delve into. And I wanted to kick off here, Richard, by asking you, what is the current state of cybersecurity training? And really, why do you think there needs to be a drastic shift in how organizations approach it?
I don't think I've ever seen an effective answer to in 22 years in the industry. I mean, training has always been seen, in my experience, as a tick box exercise. I mean, if you think about what CISOs care about the most, right, and the top two things on any CISO's list or any senior business decision maker in security will be never suffer an outage, right? And the second is never fail an audit. So training has been seen as the audit tick box sort of step to take. And actually, it solves the former much more effectively. The outage problem, whether it's a security breach or just a negligent insider doing something they shouldn't have done, you have to take a more proactive approach in saying, well, how are my current training practices operating? I mean, are they really making my users understand the ownership of their chain in security and overall kind of compliance and audit? And so historically, we as businesses, and I've been to thousands of companies in the 22 years talking about these very points, is that we just go through standard sort of 3 or 4 minute videos. There's a typical multiple choice question. And if you look at how those dots connect between, well, what am I training my staff on versus what are my business critical assets and what would represent the worst sort of nightmare for my company? And you'll often find they really generally don't connect. And the reason behind that, I think, this is the current state of cybersecurity training, is it's very audit driven and businesses aren't looking at what their biggest challenges are in terms of user behavior or patterns of behavior in the business, because they haven't had the right tools or capabilities to pick out those patterns. So what I mean by that is, we may think, well, let's train our staff on phishing. Well, every business has a phishing problem, but what kind of phishing emails are the ones that your business is going to more likely fall victim to, right? Is it, finance kind of phishing emails? Is it IT support phishing emails? Is it, where do we think we're going to be targeted as a company? And then how can we effectively train our organization to look out for those kind of breach attempts or compromise attempts that will represent a big challenge for us. So, the shift has to be, let's stop looking at training as something we just have to do and we kind of take off the shelf products and services to do it. Let's look at what our business does, right? What do we have as data assets? Where do they sit? What are we protecting them from? And formulate a training program that's actually effective for the business needs and outcomes. And that's the approach that we need to be taking in training, in my opinion and experience.
I don't think a lot of people are going to argue with you when you kind of take that approach, because I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is that audit approach. It is that let's just print off a sheet that works for everyone and apply it to my business, which is not how a lot of organizations work. So obviously honing that down and giving a more presentable for each organization is the goal. But how do we get to that point where organizations actually implement that and take that time to not only understand what's beneficial for their employees, but also them as employers?
So you got to start with, and it may sound counterintuitive to the challenge, but you've got to simplify your training programs. And then maybe let's take one step back, right? So we know the world's changed. I'm not going to mention what we all live and know to be our normal lives every day, but what's actually drastically changed, forget about pandemics, is that we've accelerated our distributed working environment methodology by a factor of sort of 5 to 7 years by some analysts' kind of review. So that means we're now forced into this distributed remote working environment more so than we ever thought we would be. So now we have different challenges to solve. How do you train an organization in this distributed way? What are the new things that you're going to face in these distributed environments, this kind of working from home methodology? So if you look at training programs that were built, 3, 4, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, as an organization, have we actually reviewed whether they're now effective for what is the new kind of business operating model? And then to kind of go back to the original point, now, we have to think about training as something that we can build empathy into for our organizations and our staff. So what you need to start doing is making the whole training process personable. Like, let's explain to the user why we should be more vigilant to communications over the phone or email or text message, right? Smishing is the latest kind of craze. And what would happen in terms of fallout if we weren't to take ownership, if we weren't to ask second or third level questions. And don't just say this is bad. Like, explain the story. What, if I do click on this link and I download a malicious application, or I don't really look at the URL that is being presented in the link and ask just questions whether I think it's bad or not. Well, if I do get to a stage where I'm compromised, what does a compromise mean to the business? Who gets affected? Is it just the employees? Is it the customers? Is it the whole business operating model? When you do that, what you start to find is employees care a significant amount more about really thinking about their actions in terms of cybersecurity and audit and compliance, because they don't want the business to be affected. They don't want their job to be effective. And probably more importantly, they don't want the service they're providing customers to be affected. So it's got to, the change has to be, let's make training a journey, something that the organizational users can understand end to end, and not just think about as a Q&A or a multiple guest questionnaire at the end of non-specific videos and tutorials.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. No one wants to spend their afternoon going through videos about why phishing's bad or what attacks are going to come in. So I think that's very, very key point. So I guess the third and final question is the hard one: is what's the best way for organizations to make that transformation, and whose responsibility is it to bring that in? Is it CISOs? Is it managers? Is it teams? Where does this kind of start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's probably two distinct angles to this in my experience. So where I first kind of got wind of, wow, we've been doing training wrong, and it's not resonating with the people that are at the front line. All right, we're in a new, and I don't mean to militarize this in any way, but we're in an era of modern warfare like we've never seen, and everybody's on the front line, right? If you have a connected device, you're on the front line of this new war against the cyber criminal, right? Whether that's nation state or cyber crime in its sort of pure sense. What I saw kind of work in the very recent past, a large organization, a European co-location kind of cloud services transformation business, would run these kind of almost like theater consortium events where they'd bring users from different departments to this kind of theater environment, and they would have somebody from legal stand up and give a talk about, the effects or potential effects of a breach of data on customer personally identifiable information. Then they'd have the security operations team come and talk about a day in their life. And then they'd have the IT ops team come in. They'd have the kind of incident response teams, and then you'd have a message from the CISO. So what you did was you involved all lines of the organization in very short sort of chunks, if you like, in the kind of chain of ownership for security and all the things that come around with being a vigilant employee. And you walked a mile or half a mile almost in the shoes of each of the stakeholders of the business. So you kind of understood end to end what you could do to impact the problem. So it was more of a collaborative kind of, team sort of culture growing event where people understood that actually this is more important than just not clicking on a link. This is about understanding more what the extra mile I can go to help prevent, my business's worst nightmare. Now, the flip side of that is who owns it? Well, absolutely, culture stems from the top of any business, right? And we know that through the ages. So it has to be a board level thing. Boards have to be able to understand that actually a significant proportion of the problems that they're facing on a day-to-day basis, if you look at all of them, most of them started with a link being clicked on or credentials being leaked through a compromised website or whatever it might be. These are problems that could have been solved more than likely through good training practices. So if the board doesn't take ownership of that, if the CTO, if the CISO, if the CIO doesn't understand that actually I own training and enablement for my organization, then it kind of falls to the SOC and the audit team and the governance and risk compliance team as just part of their focus. But they don't really have the same ownership in terms of the business, kind of needs and requirements, quite like the board do. And their budgets may be limited. They're probably begging for budget, to be fair, for training. So you kind of just get what we talked about earlier. You get this kind of checkbox exercise. We do it because we have to, and we don't really care about, how important or relevant it is. you've got to know where your weaknesses are, what you should be training on and why. And you cannot do that if you're not analyzing and what I call weaponizing your own data sets today.
Exactly. They're always on top of it to find new breaches and new methods. So everyone else should be the same. 100% agree with you. Proactive is the best approach to, I'm always spouting as well, because you don't want to start implementing something just because you've had a breach. Oh, now we've had an issue. Now we'll put something in place.
Right. Exactly.
Come ahead of that. So I think you're spot on there, Richard. So all I can really say is thanks for coming on today's show and walking us through that. I think there's a lot of key tips that people can take away going forward in 2021.
It's been a pleasure. Really great to talk to you, and hope to do it again soon. And I do hope some of the information was useful for the listeners and viewers.
Definitely. I think that's very true. And thank you everyone who did take the time to watch this. We hope you did take a lot away. If you are looking for more information or any resources, then head on over to exabeam.com to find out more information. We'll be back next week with another episode in our Tech Chat series. In the meantime, you can join the conversation at EM360 Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. And of course, for more daily content, head on over to em360tech.com.